Thank you so much for joining us today. It's as usual at the COP, one event to the other. There's very little time between events. My apologies to all of you for this small delay that we are having, and without further ado, and to start the proceedings, I would like to invite our esteemed panelists to take the stage with me so that we can start. I would open asking that Ms. Rabab Fatima, the United Nations Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, to join me on stage, please. And I would follow on inviting our other colleagues, Ms. Atle Solberg, the head of the Secretariat of the PDD, Dr. Atik Rahman, the Executive Director of the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, and Ms. Grace Maile from the Rising Nations Initiative of Tuvalu. We will be joined a little bit later by Ms. Tina Stege, the Climate Envoy of the Marshall Islands, and by Ms. Gabriela Sakin, the co-founder and president of the Young Indigenous Leaders for Nature and Climate Network from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think they are in transit. And we have one more colleague. Please join us. Thank you. And Dr. Mohammed Gulen Ghabani, head of the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat at BRAC. A pleasure. Thank you all so much for the audience and, of course, for the people here. I would start by asking the Undersecretary General and High Representative to do opening remarks for us to set the tone of our conversation. Ma'am, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, distinguished members of the panel, dear friends and colleagues, I extend a very warm welcome to you all to this side event on climate migration. And it's great to be partnering with the International Organization for Migration for this event. Our distinguished panel today comprises experts, community leaders, and youth representatives who will soon share their valuable perspectives. And before we delve into their insights, please allow me to share a few thoughts. Climate migration disproportionately impacts communities in the most vulnerable nations, namely the least developed countries, the landlocked developing countries, and the small island developing states. We convene in a year that has once again shattered records. Heat, rainfall, and storm are all clear indicators of the worsening effects of the climate crisis. These effects threaten the lives and livelihoods of millions, particularly those in communities and countries least equipped to adapt. The LDCs, LLDCs, and the SIDS are contending not only with a climate crisis, but also with environmental degradation, natural disasters, poverty, rising debt, and limited economic opportunities. The combined effects of these challenges amplify their structural vulnerabilities, making them more susceptible to the negative effects of climate change. As severe drought shrivels crops in Somalia and storm surges wash over the atolls of Kiribati, far too many vulnerable communities around the world must decide whether to leave their homes. Projections indicate a dramatic increase in climate change-induced migration in the coming decades, with estimates suggesting that by 2050, 1.2 billion people, roughly 13% of the global population, could be displaced. The repercussions of climate displacement are not confined to the individuals and communities affected. They also extend to the countries and regions hosting them. Climate migrants encounter numerous challenges and risks during their journeys and at their destinations, including physical dangers, psychological distress, social exclusion, as well as economic and legal hardships. Confronting this urgent and complex issue demands a comprehensive human-centric approach. solutions already exist in frameworks like the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and the UN Secretary General's Action Agenda on Internal Displacement. These blueprints outline the means through which fully inclusive governance of human mobility can be achieved. Dear colleagues, allow me to briefly bring to your attention a few key points to guide our approach going forward, and these may include one, recognizing the rights and needs of climate migrants, which includes understanding the potential benefits they bring to their host communities and countries. Two, establishing robust regional and national frameworks which are essential for managing climate migration in a safe, orderly and dignified manner. And I'm sure the panelists that we have here will be reflecting on some of these issues. Three, investing in resilience building, disaster risk reduction and adaptation measures for both the origin and destination countries of climate migrants. We should also foster development opportunities that empower communities to adapt and thrive despite these environmental disruptions. Four, ensuring that collective efforts from grassroots initiatives to global partnerships are fully mobilized to address climate migration and support the often forgotten victims of climate change. Clearly, climate-induced migration is not just a humanitarian issue. It is also a security issue, a development issue, and a human rights issue. If we neglect to act now, we risk a crisis of unprecedented scale with serious consequences for peace, stability, and prosperity worldwide. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, COP28 marks an important stop on our way to two major UN conferences next year. Firstly, we have the 4th International Conference on the Small Island Developing States, which will be held in Antigua and Barbuda in May. And secondly, the 3rd International Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries to be held in Kigali, Rwanda in June, both to be held next year. As the Special Advisor of the CIDS Conference and the Secretary General of the LLDCs Conference, I look forward to ensuring the widest possible coalition of support for these conferences where climate action, including on issues related to climate mobility, will be high on the agenda. As I conclude, I would like to express my sincere thanks once again for your presence here today. I know there are many meetings going around, but so thank you for being here and for your support for this event. Our discussions, I hope, will follow, will not be just ending here today, but will continue. And I hope that it will play a crucial role in advancing the dialogue and turning pledges and commitments into meaningful action for the world's most vulnerable countries. I shall rest it here. I would like to say that once upon a time I worked for IOM and I dealt with these issues from the ground level. I saw how climate displaces, climate migrants, everyone. This is an issue which is very real, especially for those countries which are highly climate vulnerable, whether these are island nations or low-lying coastal states or dry lands. So I think we will have to accord the right amount, the right level of attention and priority that is needed to address this growing problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma'am High Representative, for those inspiring words, and once upon calling on the urgency of this conversation and on the urgency of the topics we have discussed. There is a glimpse of hope on the first days of the COP on some of the decisions made. We are very hopeful that the momentum will be carried out throughout the days and that we can have a clear path of a strong, determined and effective action in the future. I would not elongate myself on delivering opening remarks because I think there's not the need for you to hear from me, but I would be much more interested in opening a dialogue at the end of the event so that people can make questions. I can listen to my own voice from another event. And with this point, and thank you, the High Representative, for being here, I would like to change a bit the orient. You don't mind, and I apologize for the gender breakdown of the panel. The other two female colleagues are was the unique challenges faced on her community and how these vulnerabilities are exacerbated by climate change that may or not lead to migration and displacement or other forms of mobility. Grace, the floor is yours. Wherever you want, Grace. Okay. What makes you comfortable? Here, there, what we want is your voice.
Yeah. Ta'alofa katoa koutou. Warm Pacific greetings from the Pacific to you all. My name is Grace Malia, and I am happy to represent Tuvalu and the Rising Nations Initiative here in COP28. Before I start, I would just like to recognize if you all know where Tuvalu is and how Tuvalu is like, the geographical situation that we're in. Can I just get a few hands? Does anyone know what Tuvalu looks like? Oh, okay, great. That's a lot in the audience. Okay, I'll jump straight into it. So as I stand here today, my heart is heavy with the echoes of crashing waves and the whispers of the wind, speaking not just of the beauty of our island home in Tuvalu, but now into uninvited, destructive guests. We face not just climate change, but a relentless assault on our homes, on our families, and our future. Our communities are not merely surviving, they are innovating. Can't plant food on the ground due to soil salinity? Use food cubes and plant above the ground. Our ground freshwater lenses infiltrated due to increase in soil salinity? Use water tanks to store water. We keep adapting to the changes that climate change throws our way. Their resilient spirit is a testament to the creativity that emerges in the face of desperation. Partnerships to us mean more than just financial aid. When a global initiative helps us implement sustainable energy solutions, it's not just about light in our homes. It's about hope for our future. And this is where Rising Nations Initiative comes in. R&I focuses on preserving our sovereignty, our statehood, and safeguard the rights and heritage and culture and identity as being a Tuvaluan. The Rising Nations Initiative seeks to secure a permanent existence for threatened island countries, protecting their sovereignty and culture. These partnerships are not just transactions. They are lifelines connecting us to a world that cares. Displacement is not about moving bodies from one place to another. It's about uprooting families, dismantling communities, and erasing histories. We need holistic approaches that don't just relocate us, but ensure that the essence of who we are remains intact. We're not just looking for new homes. We're looking for spaces to preserve our identity, and that's at stake. Our elders, with tear-filled eyes, recount tales of a time where the land and the people were in harmony. They share stories of sustainable practices that ensured abundance without exploitation. We must not merely listen to these stories. We must weave them into the fabric of our strategies, infusing them with the wisdom that sustains us for generations. The youth are not just statistics in a climate report. We are living, breathing embodiments of a fight for survival. In Tuvalu, young climate activists are not just marching, they are dancing to the rhythm of change. Our passion is not a mere flame, it's a wildfire that refuses to be extinguished. We are not just leaders of tomorrow, but we are warriors of today. In closing, let these words not merely echo in your minds, but resonate in your hearts. The youth of Tuvalu, like so many others in LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, actually I don't really like these terms, small island developing states. We are boss, big ocean states, are not asking for sympathy. we are demanding action. Let our stories be a rallying cry, a call to arms against the indifference that threatens to drown us. For we are not just fighting climate change, we are facing a battle for our very existence. Let us act together, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that will follow, ensuring that they will inherit a world where climate migration is a choice, not a compulsion. Fafta Ilasi. Thank you.
Go, Grace. Sorry, I'm a bit partial to this conversation. I would like to turn now to Dr. Ghulam Ghabani, because we can talk about the problems, but we also need to talk about solutions. And you, as the head of the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat, have a key role to play associated with one of the largest NGOs in the world, giving a perspective of what is local actors intervening in their futures and understanding better the solutions that need to be created to problems that need the perspective of the recipients, but also of other actors in those contexts. The floor is yours, here or at the podium. Thank you, sir.
I'm comfortable here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Let me reintroduce myself. My name is Ghulam Rabbani. I work for the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat established by BRAC with support from the government of Germany through KfW. And those who are not aware about BRAC, BRAC is the global largest South-led NGO, and we have 50 years of experiences in Bangladesh and many other countries in Africa, Asia, and North America. Let me just talk about 3 major points, and then I will definitely talk about the solutions that BRAC is doing and Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat is doing right now to address the problems of climate migrants. My first point is on the, my former speaker was talking about the statistics. I will give you some of the examples of current, migration pattern in Bangladesh. First thing is, there are 2,000 people migrate from rural areas to Dhaka, which is the capital city of Bangladesh, every day. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, according to the government of Bangladesh, because they conducted a study, and it indicates that as many as 16 to 26 million people will be migrated to the urban areas by 2050 because of climate change. It means 1 in every 7 people will be migrated to the urban areas in Bangladesh by 2050, while at the global level, the projection is 1 in every 45 people. So you can imagine what is going to happen in Bangladesh due to climate change. So in a recent study of BRAC, it shows like 57% of the slum dwellers are from 10 districts, 10 out of 64 districts, which are basically the coastal districts, and also the districts, are prone to river erosion. So this is the statistics. And regarding 2 other points, let me just share 2 stories. One story of the man and another story of a woman. Let me start with the story of a man. I met a man, of 50 years old, Mr. Abdul. He was one of my respondents of a loss and damage study. And in a question, to respond to a question, he was saying, on 24th May 2009, there was a cyclone Aila in Bangladesh that affected 12 out of 19 coastal districts. And that affected my house, my assets, and storm surge of the cyclone Aila inundated my small piece of land where I cultivated my rice. And within few hours, my house was gone, and then my standing crops, rice, was gone. And then I had to move to another district, which is 500 kilometers away, called Rangamati, which is hilly district of Bangladesh. And he stayed there for 2 years. And in 2011, he came back. He again started cultivating rice, and his rice plant was small, 4 to 5 inches. And in August, there was a heavy rainfall, 66 millimeter rainfall, and his rice plant went underwater. And then I asked him, then why did you come back? You were there in Rangamati with your family. He said, I learned how to cultivate rice in the coastal ecosystem. I learned it from my parents, my grandparents. And I lived here for last 50 years. But I did not know how to cultivate rice and crops, vegetables in a hilly ecosystem. So I had to struggle there. I struggled 2 years and then came back. And I started cultivating again. So that was because of Cyclone Aila, and now I see heavy rainfall. Within short period of rainfall, my rice plant went underwater. Then what's going to happen to my family? What I'm going to do? I don't have any other alternatives moving from this origin to another destination. So that's the problems that I've seen with the man. And the second problem, the second story that I want to talk about is an omen. And the omen was from another district, which is Barguna, located in central coast of the country. Her name was Minara Begum. On 15th November 2007, she found a devastating evening. The whole environment was dark, and she and her family were forced to take shelter at 2 o'clock at night. This was Cyclone Cedar. And then she couldn't sleep. Her family was, not sleeping at night in that shelter. And in the morning, when sun rises, she went to her home and she found nothing. Everything washed away, except her sewing machine, which is made of iron. And she was thinking, let me try to find the roof of my house, because that's the strongest, part of the house, made of corrugated iron sheet. And she went to search her roof, and she found a dead body of her neighbor. She came to her husband, and she was saying, this is the 5th time my house had been destroyed. I cannot wait for the 6th time to be destroyed, my house again. So we should move. She went to Dhaka, but the last statement she made, I came here in Dhaka, I got a new house, but I never felt the house that I had in my village. So there are 2 messages. One is the loss of livelihoods in the rural areas they are experiencing, and they don't find any other options rather than moving to a destination. And the second is the culture. The ecosystem doesn't really move, doesn't really migrate when someone migrates. So these are the 2 stories. And I will be talking about the CBF in 1 or 2 minutes. So as I was saying, BRAC established this Climate Bridge Fund to support the climate migrants. And this is a very interesting model. We received the capital fund from the German government, as I was saying, and then we invested these resources to government treasury bond, and we earn the income every year, and we support these projects. Okay? This is not like one go project. We receive the fund and we implement the project and we end up with the money. No, this is a capital grant that we invested. Is an endowment fund, and we support the projects. And we invested about 10 million euro. We get like around $1 million, in BDT, like about 10 crore, and we support the projects. And BRAC programs and also the other local NGOs, they implement the projects. And the interesting features of this project and this fund mechanism is we open it to local NGOs, and local NGOs know the context, know the problems of this, the climate migrants. So this funding mechanism is open to local NGOs, and this funding mechanism is supporting water supply, sanitation, health, housing, livelihoods of both men and women. So we are trying to build their resilience in 5 urban locations in Bangladesh with this support. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Gulam, and it's good to see that there are still donors and organizations willing to take red tape out of the resources that are necessary to give choices and solutions that people think are efficient and needed for them. But we also have a long path to go in relation to generating the policies that allow such funding and opportunities to come to. So I would now turn to Atle Solberg, the head of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, that works very closely with countries looking at policy elements and some practice elements of these conversations to make mobility safer and voluntary. Atle, over to you for your intervention.
Thank you so much, Manuel, and good afternoon, everyone. I think you didn't make it easy for me to come after these 3 speakers and to add much. So let me give it a try. I work for something called the Platform on Disaster Displacement, the PDD, and we are a state-led initiative that seeks to strengthen the protection of people that are displaced, people that are forced to move in the context of disasters, including the adverse effect of climate change. We do have some work with partners such as IOM and the governments in the Pacific, in Asia, and in the Americas, but we are very much looking at the policy side of things. I think we have already heard that the issue of people moving or staying, being forced to move or planning to move in the context of climate change is a complex issue. It intersects with both social, developmental, and political processes. So we have to admit that complexity. We also know from science that is happening, that more people will be faced with the choice to move or being forced to move due to the global warming. So that's a fact we need to factor into our planning, and we will see more of it. And it also suggests this complexity and an intersection of many issues, that we have a wide range of tools at our disposal. And one element I wanted to flag, I have three or four points, is that I was reminded this morning in another excellent event that the Conference of the Parties happens every year, and there are decisions and new policies coming in. And even before we have kind of traveled home and the dust has settled, another Conference of the Parties is coming our way. So there are a lot of policies and tools and decisions, particularly at the global level. We heard from the Undersecretary General, we are hardly done with these COPs before we have a fourth meeting of the SIDS in Antigua Barbuda next May. So we also have to recognize that at the global level, there are immense progress around climate change, human mobility, displacement, and how to tackle it. But we also have to understand that how that can cascade and have an impact on the ground is lacking, both from capacities, resources, and financing. So that's an argument. Maybe we do have the tools, at least at the global level, to deal with these, from either a disaster risk reduction issue, development, human rights, migration, or climate change. But we are at the Conference of the Parties. And what do we do here? What is it really at stake? And thank you so much, Grace, for your intervention. And I cannot pretend to speak on behalf of big ocean countries or landlocked countries. I'm from a developed countries. It's not landlocked, and we are not faced with some of these tremendous challenges. But I think the single most important thing the international community will have to do is mitigation and reduce greenhouse gas emission. We really need to accept that we need to phase out of fossil fuel. We need to peak emission tomorrow or in a couple of days. We have to be far more efficient on energy. And that means we cannot leave this COP without having that recognition that that's the most single important thing we have to do is to fix climate change or combat it according to the Sustainable Development Goals. But we are running out of options because we have already emitted too much already. So there is a global warming happening. So we need to establish adaptation goal and scale up that side of the policy response. And that's also something we need to get out of these conference of the parties with more efforts, more commitment, and more capacity to adapt, because that's also a reality, particularly big ocean countries, landlocked countries, and LDCs are facing. So the third thing we also need to look at this COP, in addition to mitigation and adaptation, is to seize the opportunity we have that loss and damage is having an emerging architecture at the global level. And my colleague from Bangladesh would clearly agree with me, the recognition of the work of Professor Salim Haq, late Professor Salim Haq, and his endless efforts to establish a mechanism at international level, a mechanism that have different wings. So in 2013, you got an executive committee, very hard start to work, and it was difficult. But recently, in 2019, in Madrid, there was a decision to establish a Santiago network that can provide technical assistance to avert, minimize, and address displacement. And we all know a couple of days ago, they established a fund. So we have the different wings together. I'm not going to overestimate the importance of this for people living at the front line tomorrow, but there is at least an opportunity to keep working on this. And I think we need to help everyone to get the Santiago network off the ground so it's able to catalyze that technical assistance for action and support that we have to provide in the most affected countries. And the fund needs to be monitored and looked after. I think the indicator of success of that fund is to what extent it can be attractive for donors, the extent to which it can be a quality fund that delivers programs and projects that are meaningful for people at the front line, the extent to which it's efficient and agile. And I think that is really up to us and the international community to make sure that the fund becomes attractive, quality, efficient, and agile. That's not going to happen without itself. And my final point is, and maybe linking what I said a lot about global policy framework coming together and telling, or global framework as a commitment by states and international community, how we have to work to avert, minimize, and address displacement, is that we need also at national and regional level these policy frameworks and laws. It's very hard to imagine that we will be able to solve some of the most dramatic challenges that we may be facing. For example, moving or plan the movement of people through a plan relocation process. It's very hard to imagine that we can do that without a policy in place that can safeguard the rights of people. It's very hard to imagine that we can do that without rules and accountability. So we need to also insist that these frameworks need to be reflected at the national level. And they will be different. Not all countries are like Tuvalu, low-lying atoll nation. There will be different nations, different countries, different communities with different needs. So with that, Manuel, thank you so much for your attention, and over to you.
Thank you, Atle. And my apologies, I will run off the cuff of my jacket because two of our speakers are not here. But as we see in movies, Miss Tina Stege and Miss Gabriela Sakina, if you are in the room, please make yourself known, or nope, that's not an issue. Questions, I think this is a good moment to open for questions. We can run these in a more informal way. There's one question here. I would suggest we do 2-3 questions, and then we allow the speakers to answer, and we can do several rounds. I have to say we have 53 minutes if we don't have the other 2 panelists, so go for it. The floor is yours. First question here on the front.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Cristina Dragomir. I'm from New York University. I have a question for everyone. As you already know, climate change is not gender neutral. Gender impacts the people and the communities in different ways. So the first thing I want to know, especially from Grace, like what do you think that's the role that gender plays for women and under-gender minorities that are affected by climate change? But also from a policy side and also from a programming side, like what do you take into account and what do you think should be taken into account for that? Another question is a little bit more difficult, I think, and that is that the Undersecretary was very generously referring to climate migrants as the topic, as the subject. However, as we know, this is not yet a legal term. This is not something that one can use to apply for refugee asylum status in any country and so on. We know that the Geneva Convention failed to do this, that the Global Compact on Migration has some interesting ways in which it can include it, but there's nothing done. So I would like to hear from the panelists, and maybe from other folks in the room as well, like what do they think about this? What do they think about the need or not having the need to integrate and create a term that refers to climate migrants and gives a legal framework for climate migrants to be recognized globally? Thank you very much.
All easy questions. Let's pick another colleague there, and there is the lady there, and then we do second round. Ma'am on the front row, second round.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much. I have a specific question to the Solberg. My name is Muhammad Shahjahan. I am from Ipsha, Bangladesh. And my question is, PDD is the result of the Nansen Initiative. And you worked a long time with the cross-border migration. And so far, there is a strategy in Bangladesh for internal migration, internal displacement. But is there any initiative or legal framework you are thinking in future for cross-border migration issues?
Thank you. My name is Amina Charimovic, and I am a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, working specifically on the rights of people with disabilities and older people in relation to climate change as well. And actually in June this year, I did publish a report on how the flooding in Bangladesh impacted people with disabilities who just face enormous difficulties to evacuate, but also when they reach the shelters, they were not accessible. They had to crawl on the floor to access sanitation and wash. And so my question is really for all the panelists, but especially for the sir from Bangladesh, how are you addressing the rights and needs of people with disabilities in the work that you do, knowing the horrific displacement that Bangladesh is dealing with? And we have heard cases of people with disabilities who have lost everything, moved to Dhaka, ended up begging on the street, and would just really love to hear from you on this perspective. But also, if other panelists would like to add on how their work includes people with disabilities, we would love to hear from that. Thank you so much.
Doctor?
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is a very interesting question. First of all, the gender integration. The first thing is gender is a very priority issue, one of the priority issue of BRAC, and CBF also takes it as one of the fifth priority issue to integrate gender in the project design. So what we do, recently we just launched a call, and the deadline is 24th December. So we are asking the NGOs, local NGOs, national NGOs to submit the projects. So what we mentioned in the call is, while you are interested to submit a proposal, you make sure one of the objective must focus on the gender aspect. So earlier in last 2-3 years, I mean, we started our operation in 2020. So in last 2-3 calls, gender was our cross-cutting issue. But this year, we want to specifically focus on this. So if we have 2 objectives, one objective must be gender focused. And this gender-related objective needs to be aligned with the outcome and the action plan. So this is the first point that we are doing. Second is when you identify the project beneficiary, we strongly encourage at least 50% of the beneficiaries should be women in every project. So it goes at least 50%, which means we encourage to make it more than 50%. So these are the 2 major points that we want to ensure that what CBF is doing in Bangladesh, and also BRAC does the same thing. So gender is one of the priority issue of BRAC. So that's the first thing. Second question, which is also very interesting regarding the persons with disabilities intervention. I assure you, in every infrastructure that we support and the NGOs, local NGOs, national NGOs implement on the ground must have the facilities so that the persons with disabilities can use. For example, the latrine. They must use the ramp so that they can go and they can use that facilities very well. So in terms of giving them water options, in terms of giving them latrine, the other infrastructures, we ensure that the persons with disabilities has been addressed. In addition, when you develop the profile of the beneficiaries, you make sure each and every person with disabilities are well addressed. They are benefited from our project. So that's the 2 things that we do from our current mechanism. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Grace, do you want to comment? Atle first? Yes. Atle.
Thank you. I think your question was somehow related, and I will try to combine it. First, I'm so glad that somebody still remembers the Nansen initiative. That makes me very happy, because we are somehow supporting the implementation of those recommendations, and some of them are very clearly related to the application of refugee law in situations where people are compelled to move across an international border. So the problem is a little, what do we mean by, for example, climate migration? So there is something about a phenomenon is very complex, because you use the word climate.
Migration is always complex.
Yes, exactly. So
Climate migration is just one of the other things that is always complex.
okay, so we.
That is an easy way.
Yeah, exactly. So we add a layer of complexity to migration and adding complex. But the point I will make is that the circumstances where people are compelled to move will be very different. So if Tuvalu is facing a situation of extreme environmental degradation, that will be somehow different from what people are facing, for example, in the Greater Horn of Africa. We are also looking into other types of natural hazards. What about earthquakes, geophysical hazard? So the more you add to that complexity, it suggests that maybe a global tool is not the best tool at your disposal, because the circumstances will be very different. And not because they are different, but needs will be different. Some situations will lend themselves to a permanent solution. It needs to be solved permanently, whereas other situations of maybe sudden onset events or an earthquake will suggest that you need a temporary solution. So what our finding is that it will be very difficult to construct a global tool that will cover for all these situations. And climate migration, depending on how you understand it, is only one situation. So that is one suggestion that we maybe even think regionally. And one example we have from the Pacific is that they now have a regional climate mobility framework where they have developed among their own states, which covers the situation they have defined as important. The second reason that is a bit complicated to develop a global tool is what do we do with refugee law? Is that something we can have applicable? And there are concerned that if we add, for example, a protocol or international obligation, that might be complicated for the respect of international refugee law. The third reason, and I'm coming back to what we were told at the Nansen Initiative, is that people are skeptical about global tools in these circumstances. People are skeptical to have this resolved at international level. They rather see a regional and national solution to this situation because needs are very different. The fourth reason I just wanted to mention is that there is, at the moment, internationally, relatively little political will to develop such global standards or obligation. But we do have something to work on. We have a global compact for migration that defines specific commitment by states that can both be used in sudden onset event and in slow onset events. So one message from us, and again reminding everyone, I said that also we are a state-led process, so we reflect what states would like to develop, is to develop pathways. So at least if people are compelled to move, that there are safe and regular and legal pathways. And these pathways may not need a global policy framework or tool. They can be based on national migration legislation. And we do have examples of that from all over the world, that states have included in the national legislation these types of pathways. It can be using some very temporary tools, such as humanitarian visa, temporary protection, which are discretionary, they are unpredictable, but they at least can afford some protection and assistance at short term. We also know that free movement of person protocols can be used, human rights standard, and even refugee law in certain circumstances. So this is what we call different tools in different circumstances. And it reflects a little what we have achieved and what is the political opportunity space for these type of policy development. So thank you.
Thank you, Atle. Who wants to take the question of integration of people with disabilities? You want to?
I already responded.
Already?
Yeah, I responded.
I will abuse my privileges as the moderator to have a comment on the issue of climate migrants as the representative of the International Organization for Migration. At the end of all of these, I will avail myself a couple of minutes to make my own remarks on that. But before we move onwards, we have with us, because she was on another meeting, Ms. Gabriela Sakina, the co-founder and president of the Young Indigenous Leaders for Nature and Climate Network from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we would like her to make a short intervention to present her views to us. We will have an improvised translation because it's only fair that we break the hegemony of the English language in this forum. I am no French speaker, but I speak other languages, and we have a colleague of ours that will do the voluntary translation. I ask your comprehension for this while we do this phased out. Ms. Sakina, the floor is yours.
Merci pour la parole. Et je présente mes excuses d'abord pour les retards. J'étais un peu occupée de l'autre côté. Et je vais parler en français.
I would like to present my apologies for being delayed, and I will be expressing myself in French.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Je suis Gabriela Sakina, une jeune autochtone, leader congolaise, engagée en faveur de la justice climatique et environnementale pour les populations autochtones, victimes des déplacements des migrations forcées en RDC.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gabriela Sakina. I am a youth leader from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I am advocating for environmental and climate justice in relation to people on the move.
Je suis cofondatrice et l'actuelle présidente du réseau Young Indigenous Leaders for Nature and Climate, YANLEC Network en sigle.
I am the co-founder and the leader of Young Indigenous Leaders for climate and Nature and Climate.
Yeah. Qui est une organisation autochtone à but non lucratif, qui mobilise, qui éduque, qui renforce les capacités, qui responsabilise et qui fournit un soutien technique et stratégique aux jeunes leaders autochtones et leur organisation de base.
So it's an organization that provides, it's an indigenous organization that is a charity that provides capacity building and empowers youth with identifying responsibilities to themselves, provide technical capacity building to other indigenous leaders.
Nous faisons ça dans le but de la recherche et l'identification, le développement et la diffusion des solutions autochtones concrètes fondées sur la nature écologique et climatique, notamment les problèmes de migration et les déplacements qui affectent la majorité des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales touchées négativement et injustement par les changements climatiques.
So we do this also to, in relation to identifying research gaps and identifying solutions that are nature-based solutions to have an impact on the ecosystem and the climate that affects indigenous people. Indigenous people that are mainly impacted and in an unfair way by climate change.
Alors que leur subsistance, leurs activités, leurs connaissances, leur mode de vie restent essentiellement pour protéger la nature et lutter efficacement contre les changements climatiques en RDC et en Afrique entière.
So livelihoods and activities of the indigenous youth and their knowledge and their way of living together is essential to protect the nature and to fight efficiently against climate change in the country, but also at continental level.
Concernant les changements climatiques, le premier cas, les autochtones sont victimes des ravages des aléas du climat. Soit leurs plantes sont brûlées parce qu'il n'y a pas de pluie, soit il y a la pluie et la pluie vient ravager toutes les plantes, soit ça crée des éboulements et là, les femmes seront obligées, les femmes et les filles, d'ailleurs ce sont les victimes principales, elles sont obligées de se déplacer pour aller s'installer ailleurs.
So part of the consequences of climate change include the fact that young indigenous people are victims of the adverse effects of climate change because their plants, because of the lack of rain or the change in rain patterns, in rainfall patterns that affects their crops. Also because the rain comes and drowns all the plants that they have in their crops, and also because it creates landslide, especially in places where women have to end up being displaced. Noting that it is women that are the main people feeding families.
Parce que là, chez nous, ce sont les femmes et les filles qui s'occupent de leur ménage. Et quand on se déplace comme ça, on est obligé d'aller s'installer ailleurs. Là, peut-être il n'y a pas d'école. Vous pouvez trouver qu'il y a des gens qui n'étudient pas. Par exemple, moi, j'ai étudié très difficilement. Et ce n'était pas vraiment facile. Vous pouvez vous déplacer cette année. Tu arrêtes les études. Parfois, là où vous êtes installé, il n'y a pas d'école. Et puis, vous êtes obligé d'arrêter. Pour rester avec les parents, je suis fille, je ne peux pas rester seule. Je reste avec les parents là-bas, là où nous sommes déplacés. Et puis, là, nous sommes victimes de beaucoup de choses, notamment les violences sexuelles. Parce que déjà, quand vous vous installez là où il n'y a pas de... Là où vous ne connaissez pas, et là où aussi c'est affecté par le changement climatique, vous pouvez aller cultiver trop loin, chercher de l'eau, et là, vous serez victime de beaucoup de cas, par exemple, de violences sexuelles.
We should note that when women are displaced, they are quite often more, have a tendency to be more impacted by sexual violence. And she was giving the example of herself and noting that when you're displaced, quite often there's a disruption in your education as well. And when you end up being displaced, you end up living in areas that you're not familiar with, and also in areas where you have to walk further distances both to cultivate your crops but also to fetch water, and it's within these distances that women are more likely to be victims of these forms of violence.
Et il y a aussi d'autres cas de gens qui viennent en RDC aussi. Il y a par exemple le cas des Mbororo qui viennent du Tchad. Ils viennent avec leurs vaches, ils amènent en RDC. Et là, ça crée des problèmes entre les communautés locales et les migrants. Là, il y a la migration forcée.
There is also the case in the country where we can see herders from Chad, with a reference specifically to the Mororos, that come to the country, and we can see growing tensions between the local communities and the migrants in this context.
Et quand ils viennent avec leurs vaches, quand ils viennent comme ça avec leurs vaches, nous ne sommes pas à l'aise en fait, c'est là où nous sommes. Et puis, il n'y a pas moyen vraiment d'évoluer, il n'y a pas moyen de choses, les vaches vont abîmer tout ça. Et après, on va étudier comment. Parce que moi-même, j'avais étudié, c'est parce que mes parents cultivaient. Si les Mbororo là, les migrants là, ils viennent avec leurs vaches, ça ravage tout. Maintenant, on va étudier comment.
When people come with their herds, there are issues with the crops that are destroyed quite often. And these crops are the main livelihoods of the communities, and that also has an impact on the disruption of the education of the people in these communities. How are we supposed to study? How are we supposed to be educated if we do not have the means anymore to pay for it?
Notre expertise, nous travaillons sur la justice climatique pour que les gens qui n'ont pas pollué l'environnement, parce que les gens qui polluent l'environnement, nous les connaissons tous, et ils sont là, ils continuent de polluer. Pourtant, ce sont les femmes, les filles, surtout les peuples autochtones qui subissent ça. Nous sommes là pour alerter, je suis là pour amplifier la voix de la jeune fille, des femmes autochtones, pour au moins qu'il y ait assistance, parce que nous sommes victimes de migration forcée, nous sommes victimes de changements climatiques. Pourtant, ce n'est pas nous qui avons causé ça. Et quand on est victime comme ça, nous ne sommes pas assistés ni par l'État, ni par les communautés. Nous ne sommes pas assistés.
So they are working specifically on climate justice for people who have not contributed to the current pollution. And we know who these people are, and we know also that women and indigenous people are specifically affected and specifically impacted by the adverse effects of climate change, while they have not contributed to it, and they quite often do not have any support from the state or any local communities either.
Oui, c'est ça. Et nous avons besoin que nos droits soient respectés, parce que quand j'ai grandissé en train de vivre tout ça, je me suis décidée alors d'aller faire même les études de droit. Peut-être que là, je saurai mes droits. Et là, quand j'évoluais, j'ai commencé déjà à regarder ce que je vais faire. Et là, j'ai compris que nos droits sont vraiment violés. Les gens ont droit d'accéder à... Bon, nous avons droit d'accéder à nos... Nous avons droit d'accéder à nos ressources forestières, tout ça, mais quand il y a changement climatique, les droits sont violés. C'est ça.
So we need to have our rights respected, and so when growing up, she decided to study law to be more familiar with the different rights she was entitled to, and her community as well. And when studying, she realized how her rights were actually being violated because of the inactions around climate change, and especially when it comes to the right to access to forest resources. Yeah.
J'aimerais vraiment que ces cas soient inscrits dans différents rapports et cela trouve des solutions vraiment. Je me suis décidée de commencer à monter des rapports moi-même. Je me suis décidée de commencer à... Je vais travailler là-dessus. je vais travailler avec notre organisation pour que les rapports soient au moins connus, pour que peut-être que les gens vont nous assister.
The cases that she highlighted earlier need to be included in the different reports, especially the one that work on the identification of solutions. So she is currently working herself in drafting this report. She's doing this with her organization and hoping that this would be taken forward in the identification of solutions.
J'espère vraiment que nos problèmes vont trouver des solutions et ça me fera vraiment plaisir. Et merci beaucoup de m'avoir entendu.
She hopes that all these problems will find a solution, and she's very glad that you're here to listen to her, and many thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Gabriela, because I think it needs courage and determination to take this stand and be able to make your voice heard. And I'm very proud that the organizers of this event have allowed that space. This is what we want to see: more people that are being affected, more people that need more power to be part of decisions, to be listened, and to be part of these conversations. I would open now for a second round of questions. Let's do again 3 questions, 3 answers. That would be very helpful. This lady here is first, then our colleague there, and I can take one more question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone on the panel. Thank you everyone for being here. I think similarly, and I'm so glad we were able to hear this young woman. I think similarly to what the person asked earlier, my name is Erica Vincent. I'm from the United States. I say that apologizing for everything that everyone has been blaming us for, because I know that it is our fault. But I'm from the United States. I'm representing an organization called the Chisholm Legacy Project. And we manage a network of global Afro-descendants in the Climate Justice Collaborative. And I wanted to mention, I'm so glad that the young woman from Congo got here before I was able to ask my question, because I think similarly to what some people have mentioned around gender, around disability, and I'm so glad that was mentioned, I think race is also something that we really need to address in the UN very specifically and very poignantly, and name that. We know that, as the young woman from Congo mentioned, that most of the nations that are dealing with climate change disasters are not the ones that contributed to climate change. And so we have a resolution that we are trying to get as many people from not only African descended nations, but also African descended communities around the world in other countries, a resolution that we want folks to sign on to, the Race, Racism, and Climate Reparations Resolution, to really discuss how are we addressing both racism, systemic oppression, and anti-Blackness around the world, as we think about the ways in which climate migration and climate disaster migration is affecting folks from communities of the global majority. And how are we mentioning and how are we really uplifting that and naming it very poignantly? I think it's easy for us to kind of sweep it under the rug and say, okay, we're here now, how do we resolve it? But I think unless we name it very clearly and poignantly, and we're never going to resolve it, because we're going to continue to perpetuate the systems that many of our countries are continuing to live under, myself included as a Black woman in the United States of America. So kind of a question, I would love to hear from the panel about your feelings on that when it comes to race, along with the other systems of oppression that have been mentioned, but also kind of a comment as I continue to urge people to lift up race and racism around the world when it comes to the way that we are addressing climate change and climate mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That gentleman there, and then the gentleman on the back.
Hi everyone. My name is Akshat Sangomla. I'm from New Delhi. I work for a magazine called Down to Earth. I write about climate change and policy. So my question is to Atik. You mentioned that the newly established Loss and Damage Fund should be made attractive to donors. Please, can you explain a little bit about that? And the second part of my question is about, shouldn't the question also be that the fund has to be made more accessible to the communities, the vulnerable communities who need it the most? And shouldn't it be also that it should be made available really, really quickly. The funds have to be made available really, really quickly.
The colleague on the back, yes.
So much. My name is Abshakur Mohammed from Somalia. I work for an organization called Africa Drought Inhibition and Livestock Protection. Saves lives for producing fodder for the animals. My question is on policies. How can climate-resilient livestock management practices be integrated into national and international climate change adaptations and mitigation policies? That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have one more question there on the back, but I would like to ask if any of the female colleagues in the room wants to make a question before I give the word to another man. No? If you allow me, I will give. Please. Man, you cannot come always first, right?
Thank you. This is Ashish. I am working with Helvetia Swiss Intercorporation. So very insightful discussions. On one side, we are getting the evidences and examples of climate-induced migration and displacement. And on the other side, we are also listening what is advancing, what is the progress. But if we critically look at both sides, actually we know that the gap is very wide open, very slow and not timely. So if we look and critically look at the whole situation on the context and ground, we know that universal process and mechanism are often criticized as broken and failure system. So what will be your opinion or thought for a just, fair and timely actions for the displaced people we are talking today? Thank you.
Okay, now the difficult task of trying to distribute these questions. Christine is just translating to our colleagues so that she has the opportunity also to be part of this conversation. But maybe I would invite Dr. Gulam first and then Atle on the questions about the fund and the access to communities and on the questions on policy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Let me just take two questions. One question I will try to partially respond. It's about racism. Well, while excuse me, I was looking at the loss and damage decisions just as adopted in the on the first day. It talks about the planned relocation and displacement. So and on the other hand, it also talk about that the loss and damage fund will initially focus on the existing programs and additional support to implement the projects and programs in the respective countries. But when you talk about the planned relocation, it is actually something that has to be done before the event, is pre-disaster the projects and programs. Now, the question will arise particularly for the small island developing states like my fellow here, and then the developing countries, low-lying countries like Bangladesh, because 1/3 of the country is exposed to at least 1 meter sea level rise, 19 out of 64 districts. So the people will have to be migrated. Either internal displacement will take place or cross-border displacement. Then how do you really implement this planned relocation? Within the country or outside the country? If it is within the country, perhaps the other 40 districts can be managed in Bangladesh. But what happens to my colleague here? People of Maldives there, the other island like Cook Islands, they have 20,000 people. And I was listening the speech of the Prime Minister yesterday. So where do they go? So now the question is whether the developed country who are responsible for all these greenhouse gas emissions, well, of course, the other countries are also emitting. So I'm talking about the CBDRR principle. So in that case, whether those countries are ready to accommodate these people are exposed to sea level rise and displacement. So that will be a challenge, and it is already integrated in this adopted decisions. So racism is definitely a challenge, when you have this program. My second point is, from here, who asked question about the migration in national policy. Let me give you an example about Bangladesh. In macro plan of the country, 5-year plan, we are currently, having our 8th 5-year plan in the country, and also national adaptation plan is also ready. So in both this policy instrument of Bangladesh, critically recognized the internal displacement and climate-induced migration pattern. So they also, talk about it. But when you plan about this planned relocation, this document shows that this country needs $8.5 billion US per year from 2023 to 2050, 230 billion US dollar. And the country is basically, trying to raise from its domestic resources about 3 billion. So it's roughly 1/3. So what happens to the rest, 5 billion or 5.5 billion US dollar? So this is kind of support. I mean, if you take it as an example of Bangladesh, this support is required for this planned relocation to address the problems of climate migrants across the world, especially in the most vulnerable countries like Tuvalu, Bangladesh, and the other islands. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. I would pass now the word to Grace to also address a bit the question around accessibility.
Great, thank you. Before I move on to the question of accessibility, I would just like to address the question that was posed on gender equality in Tuvalu. So let me just give you like a brief intro on how our traditions are in the Pacific. In the Pacific, before, men have this final say in everything. Men talk, the women and the youth implement and do the job. But over time, due to climate change, our stance and our roles in our communities have changed. We also now have member parliaments, a first female member parliament who is in the House, Dr. Puakena Borham on the side. And so with climate change, it actually also poses a question on our cultures and how, and our traditions as we have evolved. And we can talk more on that after this panel discussion if you're interested. On the accessibility part on funds, 28 COPs, guys. 28 COPs, 27 last year, and we finally heard news about the Loss and Damage Trust Fund. It took about 27 COPs for that discussion to be really out there. So my next question is, how many more COPs will it take for these funds to be transitioned or to be trickled into our societies and communities in the Pacific? And how can you also put a value on our cultures, on what's at lost, what's at stake? And for us at the Pacific, as a young Pacific, it's our identities. It's us, it's an entire race. How can you put a price to that? So I really challenge our leaders who are in negotiating rooms. How do you, it's crazy to even talk about it because, the discussions have changed over time. My grandfather, they would just talk about how life was in the islands. And now, the younger generation, we have to talk about where we would move to. How do we carry that to the new land if worst case scenarios, our land submerges? So, accessibility to funds in the Pacific, it's still a struggle. It really is. And that it shows because it took about 28 COPs to have that discussion. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Thank you, Grace. Very good. I would ask Atle to talk about some of the questions put, and then Gabriela wants also to comment.
Thank you for that question, and it's a reminder, I have to be careful how I talk about it, because that was my point of the quality of the fund, that it is accessible to affected communities. But we are just learning. It came a couple of days ago, so we need to, how do we formulate expectation on the fund? And that's exactly what I meant. It has to be efficient, agile, and reach. the text in the decision is quite clear, where it should go, who should be the beneficiaries, and how this shall be established. So that's the task at hand, and as Grace said, don't let it wait another 27 COPs. This needs to come on board online very quickly. But we have also to manage expectations. It's not a lot of money being pledged to that fund yet, and the challenges are enormous. So we need to also don't forget that there are huge opportunities around development funding, other sources of funding, so don't sell ourselves only to that. And I'm calling from the United States. I think you had a very important question. I'm not even sure if I'm close to respond to what is your concern, but it goes back to what I said a little about we are at the conference of the parties, and the Paris Agreement is an international treaty, and it's very strong on obligation on states. So states have obligation under that treaty. And one obligation is that they shall promote, protect, and fulfill human rights in all action related to climate change action. And that gives us at least an opportunity for accountability and to ask duty bearers to solve many of the issues we as humanity are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Wetley. Gabriela?
Merci pour la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
Je vais essayer de répondre à toutes les questions à la fois.
I will try to answer to all the questions at the same time.
Bon, je vais compliquer. Me demander, est-ce que je pense que je peux avoir des solutions en participant à la COP? C'était ça la question?
I would like to answer to the question on the solutions in the context of UNFRC and the COP being highly criticized.
Ah, ok. Bon. C'est pas que je m'attends à avoir des solutions directes ici. Et participer à la COP, pour moi, c'est un privilège parce que je ne m'attendais pas du tout. Et puis, c'est ma première fois de participer à la COP.
I'm not expecting solutions right here. It's the first time I'm participating in a COP, and it's a huge privilege for me.
C'est un grand privilège pour moi parce que au moins je suis là où je peux exposer mes problèmes et je pense que les gens vont les prendre en compte. Donc, mon travail actuellement, c'est de faire monter les rapports. Il faut que les gens, le monde entier sachent qu'il y a des autochtones quelque part qui sont victimes de changement climatique et de migration.
So it's a huge privilege for me to be at COP because it's a place where I can give more visibility to the problems and my problems, and also more visibility to the reports. And it's also a space where this can be taken into account and really showing that somewhere there are indigenous people that are victims of the impacts of climate change and mobilities.
Parce que les peuples autochtones sont aussi capables, avec leurs connaissances. Bon, je pense que vous pouvez... Les gens qui sont ici, je suis là, c'est pour parler, pour informer le monde entier qu'il y a des autochtones qui souffrent. Et puis, vous devez savoir que les autochtones ont aussi des connaissances qui pouvaient nous aider à nous adapter et à atténuer les impacts du changement climatique.
So I am here to speak about, of course, the indigenous people that are suffering, but also the fact that these same people have the knowledge that can be used as solutions in the context of adaptation and mitigation as well.
Aussi, parce que même les jeunes africains en général sont plus susceptibles d'accepter de déménager et peuvent ouvrir la voie à l'exploitation de la mobilité climatique dans un continent plus connecté.
Also because young people in Africa are more likely or more able to move, and it really is a good ground to show how mobility or migration can be used as...
Ce que je demande à tous ici, c'est d'essayer d'exploiter les ambitions de la jeunesse, favoriser, exploiter la créativité les potentiels de la jeunesse africaine déjà mobile.
What I'm asking people really here is to try to exploit the opportunities that are brought forward by youth, but also the one that are related to mobilities and migration in this context.
Je vous demande aussi de renforcer la résilience, l'économie, la prospérité et faire progresser la transition verte.
I'm really also here calling for reinforcing resilience, economies, prosperity, and working on green transition.
D'impliquer aussi le secteur privé, d'impliquer aussi et d'effectuer aussi des investissements plus résilients sur le long terme. Les partenariats privés peuvent fournir un soutien direct au financement d'initiatives d'adaptation au changement climatique.
I'm also calling for it being including more the private sector and seeing how investments can be more used in the context of private partnerships to support the solutions. Thank you.
Merci, and thank you to you all. I think we have 7 minutes, and because I think this is a barrier of power to conversation, I will make, abusing my powers, the remark on climate migrants. I will thank all the participants, and I invited us to, on the same level of the floor, continue this conversation in a much more direct and humane way than this physical power barrier that exists here and is across this entire conference of the parties. So I thank all the panelists. I think he's been excellent, and of course to our audience, these different forms, we need to come together and listen to different perspectives, because what unites us is stronger than what separates us. And trust is the most valuable commodity that we have as humans, and that's what we need to do, is to build that trust, that solidarity. So I thank the panel for being able to do this, and I would point out the question that climate migrants are just migrants. The fuss about climate change is a fuss about an imperative of life-saving to many people that will affect a large part of the world that has done nothing to do, while others sit very comfortable in their houses with limitations to different extents. But the refugee status is a collective achievement to guarantee extreme protection to certain individuals. We do not need extreme protection. What we need is solidarity, and we need responsibilization, as is enshrined on shared and differentiated responsibilities. I think that a good example is COP, because everyone that is here got a visa to be here. There was the political will to give a visa to everyone coming from anywhere in the world at large to this conference. In any other circumstances, are we all sure that many of the voices and the people that are here would have that visa? The question should be that, because the day there is the will for people to be able to choose mobility, and the right pathways of mobility are on the table as enshrined on the Global Compact for Migration, the famous pathways, then this question is a non-question. When the mobility pathways are a visa for 200 people, a visa for a certain profile of people, a visa to feed a certain need, then it's not solidarity. It is a transactional relation, which is important and we should incentivize. But I really think that if we put 84,000 people from different countries in UAE for this conference, there is many, many people that can have a path to a better life somewhere in the world where they can make a difference. Sorry, this is a perspective as mine, and we can continue this down. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for everyone on the panel.
Can you have a group picture then? Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator. You can have a group picture.
Yes, then we were not here.